a little late today. Okay, let's get started. Bring up the screen. Hi, Jody.
It's Thursday garbage day. It's part of why I changed my schedule as well.
Oh, okay. Okay, so yesterday, what we were dealing with is there's a halachic obligation to treat your workers to treat your workers properly. But we said, as far as, let's say, paying them on time, but in the Rav Shulchan Aruch, we saw that it's possible to make a tanai, to make a tanai that would allow you to forego paying them as long as the employee is amenable to that. So then we looked at the Shulchan Aruch yesterday in Orach Chaim that kol davar shemevin lifnei ha'adam sheyesh lo reach v'ha'adam toiv lo tzarich litein mimenu l'shamash. That if there's an aromatic food that the food server is going to be serving, you're obligated to give the worker some of the food first before they go out to serve it, because if not, it's creating anguish, creating pain to the worker. The cost of Shama Magin Avram Sifkat and Aleph, the afilu im hisna im misharso be'esichiruso liftar atzmu mizeh, that the Magin Avram writes, and we saw this quoted in the Mishnah Berurah yesterday, that even if the employer makes a deal with the worker and says, you have to work for me on the condition that I don't have to feed you when we bring out the aromatic food, scroll down here. Lo mahani hatanai, kevin shuhu mishum tsa'ara. Such a tanai does not help because there's an aspect of affliction involved. And since the guy is undergoing some kind of suffering or affliction, you can't go over to someone and say, allow me to punch you in the nose. In other words, you can't make a tanai with someone, especially if they're under your employ, and basically say to them, you hereby agree to work for me under the condition that I get to abuse you. Okay, so there's no tanai that's going to help in that situation. That could actually help to form an exemplar, as far as how you treat employees. It's even when a person willingly enters into an employment contract, because let's say it's hard to find good work, but are you allowed to abuse them just because you make a tanai with them in advance, that I get to yell at you, I get to call you names, I get to insult you? No. So the same thing is true. You can't make a tanai that's going to cause someone sorrow. So in this situation as well, while it is possible to make a tanai with an employee saying that there are going to be times when I'm going to be late, and I won't be able to pay you at the end of the day or at the end of the week or whenever the pay period is, are you hereby willing to forego those instances? Yes, but as we saw yesterday, you should not rely on that heter to give you license to wantonly neglect your employees and just pay them late. Because whenever you have the ability to pay them, and whenever you're available to go to the employee to pay them, you're mechuyev to do so. There may not be a mitzvah de oraisa that you're violating if you don't, but at the same time, it's still your halachic obligation. So let's take a look at some of the biurim over here, and I think this is our last halacha that we're going to see about labor law, but we'll see. So we had said over here that a person is allowed to make a tanai with an employee that if he doesn't have the money available because he needs whatever cash he has, whatever cash reserves he has, he's going to need to pay somebody else, pay for delivery of goods or whatever it is. So he says, Makor hadvarim b'sefer chasidim, siman taf taf reish samech vav. He says the source of this halacha that you're allowed to make a tanai is from the Sefer Chasidim from the 12th century. It's brought down in the Shach and V'zelashano. Im taskir sofer lichtov lach, tatne imo shalotihya beval tolin, shema keshiyitva lo yiyah l'chalitein lo. So the Shach quotes this medieval source, which says as follows, that if you hire a scribe, let's say, which was a very common practice back in the medieval times, you couldn't just press a button and it came out of the printer. You had to hire a scribe to draw up documents for you. And so it was very common for the guy to come, show up with the documents at your door, completely unexpected. You don't have the cash with you. And really payment is due as soon as the fellow shows up with the goods. And he's done the work for you. He's done the kablanus, he's done the work, and payment is due immediately upon delivery of the work product. So what you should do when you hire a scribe is you should make a tanai, a condition that you don't want to be in violation of Baal Tulin if he asks you for the money and you don't have the ability to pay him. The afal pisha taset tanai imo titen lo kishiyitva im tuchal. But he says, and even when you made the tanai, don't just. And remember, we said it can't be phrased in that way. It has to be phrased in such a way. We saw this in Imrei Yaakov yesterday. You can't say, I don't want to be in violation of Baal Tulin. That's masna mashakasa b'Torah. You can't make a condition on not violating the Torah when you are in violation of the Torah. But rather what you have to say is, will you forgive the requirement of timely payment in the event that I'm not able to pay you? And if the guy says yes, then great, okay? So he says, but nevertheless, Sefer Chasidim writes that even after having made such a tanai, if you have the ability to pay him, you're obligated to pay him. You're not making a condition on what is written in the Torah. Shaharei amru chachamim adam masna im poel lahachilu lechem tsar umayim lachatz afal pi shechayv lahachilu kisuda shlomo ad kam lashana. Because our sages also said that even though an employer has to feed his workers the same quality food that he would eat, and the way it's expressed is even like the meal of Shlomo HaMelech, you have to feed an employee, if that's the standard. Nonetheless, you can make a condition in advance, basically where the boss says, I know that I have to pay you and I have to feed you over the course of the day, if that's the norm, if that's the societal norm, but you work for me, you only get bread and water. Okay, you're allowed to make such a tanai. Okay, and it could even be, the lechem tsar, like the black bread, the cheap bread. Okay, the tama alav haknesses hagdola, and the Knesses Hagdola is astounded with how you can say it in that phraseology. He says, because you're masna al mashakasav the Torah. So he basically says, Lo hevanti mashakasav v'sefer chasidim b'kevin shuzal mayri be'ein lo matzorech el hatanai de be'ein lo eno over beval tolin ad kan devarav. He says, and I also don't understand, he writes, the Knesset Hagdola, I don't understand, why would you be in violation of Baal Tulin if we're talking about a case where you don't have the money? Why do you have to make a tanai at all? Remember, we learned that you're not in violation of Baal Tulin if you don't have the cash. Ulam lefri divrei harav kan shehevi divrei sefer chasidim v'osit Hashem lo yilamos berevach v'yitztarech lahotziam shoprim yushavim divrei sefer chasidim. But it's very simple. The Sefer Chasidim is not talking about a person who has zero cash. He's talking about a person who has cash, but isn't able to use it to pay his employees because let's say he's expecting delivery of goods and they're not going to give him the goods unless he has cash on hand. So it's that he doesn't have cash reserves that he can use to pay his employees. Below kasha midi mashakashav haknesses hagdol. Od yesh ledaktek b'divrei harav kan sheshana bilashon hashach sham shakasav. We also have to question this idea of masna mashakasa b'Torah, because the Shach writes, make a condition that you won't be in violation of Baal Tulin. Iru hachronim al davar zedu d'chor lo moltanai zeh. He says that shouldn't work because you're basically saying that you don't want to violate the Torah when you are in direct violation of the Torah. And as the Chafetz Chaim writes in Avas Chesed, he says, "V'dad lashon zeh hakos b'sefer Chasidim hanal shemasna imo shelo yevav tolin nirali ledina dezelo mahani." He writes that doesn't help. Rak davka kishemasni mapoil sheyitratzel lahamtin al piraon scharo achar sheyavor zmanu v'chulei. You have to make the condition: are you willing to allow me to pay you late? And are you willing to forgive timely payment? That's what the condition has to be. Ve'efshir tuhu hadinim omar al menashe lo yilecha alai isra bal tolin gam kein mahani mitam b'chila ka'omer al menashe ein lecha alai ona'a v'chulei v'tzarech iyon ayin sham. Okay, and basically he says the Chafetz Chaim equivocates on this matter, and he says that it's possible that it would work because you could, like, let's say, remember we learned the halacha of ona'a many moons ago. Ona'a is where you overcharge someone for a commodity, much more than what the fair market value is. But we said that as long as you tell a person, I'm selling this to you for this price, and it's on the condition that you don't have recriminations against me for ripping you off. In other words, it's price as is, no negotiations, no recriminations that afterwards that you overpaid, because, and you're allowed to say on the condition that you don't come after me with a claim of ona'a afterwards, that I overcharged you. That does work in many instances. So the Chafetz Chaim is therefore suggesting that maybe it works over here as well, that you say on the condition that there's no Bal Tolin over here. So Rav Stern basically he goes through this whole discussion over here, which I think we're going to skip. Is it implicit that what you're saying to him is that he's moichel, timely payment, that he's forgiving timely payment? Or is the condition that you don't want to be in violation of the Torah? And so bottom line is, like he said in the Imrei Yaakov, it's always better to not invoke the term Bal Tolin in the conditional statement with the employee, but rather just say to him, are you willing to forgive timely payment? The Torah entitles you to timely payment. There may be times when it's difficult for me to pay you on time. Are you willing to forgive that? Okay. Okay. The next thing that we'll see in the right, you're asking a good question. Well, first of all, I don't know what labor an employer has to be dictated by labor laws of Dina de Malchusa, of whatever the law of the land is. So I've never studied these laws, but I wonder, is an employee allowed to sign a waiver that they're forgiving vacation days, or is it something that legally? No. I'm just saying in general. Are there things? Let's say workers' comp. Are there things that you have no choice? The company has to pay it. But I'm saying, but could an employee sign a waiver, say at the start of the employment, that I'm willing to forego certain benefits that I'm entitled to by the law? Yeah, right. But that's right. But that's built into the law here. I don't even know if that works in certain states in the U.S. It's something that's, I think, unique to Canada.
What is that, Rabbi? Sorry.
So Lloyd is talking about a probationary period.
Right.
That when you hire someone, and what is it, a 2-year probationary or 2 month? 3-month probationary period. The person is not entitled to benefits during that 3-month probationary period. They're not
Oh,
entitled to health benefits. They're not entitled to vacation time, or it doesn't accrue. Yeah. Okay. So I'm just wondering, I don't know what the current law is here in Ontario, but it'd be interesting to know what can an employee be moichel? What can they forgive or sign a waiver to, that they relinquish rights to certain things? I don't know. I don't know that you can. I don't know that it's even
yeah,
legal.
I would expect that it might be limited because otherwise the employer, particularly in an employer market, they could effectively force you to be mochel on it because otherwise you won't get the job, or you'll feel like if you don't give in there, and then all of a sudden it's employee rights that will gain suffer. So I have a feeling that perhaps that wouldn't be allowed. I'm not sure.
I
Just
mean,
from a
there's also the issue of I know overtime, for example, is a big issue. Can an employee waive their entitlement to time and a half, or double time, or things like that?
Once you quit sitting around house, you're an hourly worker, hourly paid. After sitting around a week.
I'm just going through this right now as a union. I have a union in our factory. It's a union shop. So we're going through this now because we have a 35-hour week, and now we're pushing to what seems to be the norm today is 40 hours.
Yeah.
So that's a whole negotiation that we got used to 35 hours, and they want overtime after 35 hours. But we're saying the standard today is 40 hours.
The standard is 40 hours. It's a 40-hour week.
And
So you're getting pushback, I take it.
well, what happened is the whole thing, because we brought this up before, because from 35 hours at odd, I was giving them overtime. Now I'm trying to make the standard week is 40, but I sort of started setting a precedent, especially right now, because we were so busy that 35 to 40 that they were getting time and a half. But I'm trying to tell them that no, the standard really should be 40 hours. So this is part of the whole thing. But I've already paid them, that time and a half. So
Right.
I got to go backwards.
So, Rabbi, the advantage of being at home is I've just looked it up. I just Googled it, and it says with respect to vacation time, it's Canadian Labor Code can be waived providing the employer and the employee sign an agreement for a specific year. A new agreement must be signed each year. If the waiver is agreed to, the employee's entitlement is carried over into the following year. So it's not that they lose it, they just don't get it that year, I suppose. And in Ontario, it says can be waived by the employee.
So
with a written
what you're
agreement.
saying is that if an employee doesn't take the number of vacation days that they're entitled to, without the signing of a waiver, it carries over to the next year. But if they both,
No, I think the way I read it, they say that if the waiver is agreed to, the employee's entitlement is carried over into the following year. So in other words, he's waiving it for this year because they're super busy, but he gets to carry it over to the following year.
I see.
That's how I understand it. And then in Ontario, it says can be waived by the employee with a written agreement, but vacation pay must still be paid. In other words, he can waive having the time off, but he has to get paid for that time off. He gets paid, I guess, double or whatever, the 2 weeks that he didn't take off. I guess it's like if they're super busy and they both agree, then he'll work the 52 weeks, but he'll get paid the 2 weeks he didn't take.
Yeah, I hear that.
So it sounds like you can't waive the benefit of vacation. You can just waive taking it because they're so busy that they don't have time to let you off for 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Very good. So that's all of the material for this SIF. Now we're going to get into a totally different subject, as you'll see in just a moment. Amavir chavis mimakom lamakom bischar. Let's talk about employees' responsibilities. I'm an employee. My job is to schlep. I'm schlepping a barrel from point A to point B, and I get compensated for that. I work in a warehouse, let's say. V'nishbera b'pshiyasa, and the barrel breaks due to my negligence. Kagon, sharatz yoter midai, that I'm running too quickly because I want to see how many barrels I can get done in the day, and I want to finish early or whatever my excuse is. But because I ran so quickly, I tripped and I dropped the barrel and it broke. Oh, sheholach b'makom ra'ua b'nitkal b'chol kayotze bazeh. Or I tried to take a shortcut, and the shortcut has a rough, an uneven terrain, and as a result, I tripped and the thing broke. Or any other example, the inyan shechayev l'shalem min hadin, in a situation where the halacha would require me as an employee to pay for the damage that I caused. Okay, because the halacha is that when I'm in someone's employ and I damage their goods through negligence, I have to pay for whatever I broke. It's only if it wasn't negligence, if it was a legitimate, unintentional accident that did not involve negligence, that I don't have to pay. I mean, one of the things that you see on some of these clips on YouTube are people working in warehouses, and whether they're driving the forklift, or whether they're, stacking things on a shelf, and these catastrophes happen. You know what I'm talking about? Like, like everything comes crashing down, or the guy who's driving a semi-huge truck that's filled with something, and it wasn't loaded correctly, and he opens the door and everything just comes spilling out or whatever it is, and it just creates a huge mess on the freeway. And anything like that, he says, mitzvah al balabayis lahachnis imo lifnim mishuras hadin v'limcholo. So listen to this halacha. He says it is a mitzvah upon the balabayis to go above the letter of the law. And we have to analyze this language carefully. He's not saying that halachically this is what I'm obligated to do as an employer, but it is a mitzvah for me to go above the letter of the law and forgive the employee and not require them to pay. Now, obviously, this will have limitations depending upon whether this is a repeat offense. If I got to teach the guy a lesson because he keeps doing this and he continues to be negligent, then at some point, I'm going to have to tell him, listen, next time you do this, I'm going to have to charge you for the breakage. But if it happens once, then it's a mitzvah to go above the letter of the law and to forgive him for the damage. Shenemar, leman telech b'derech tovim. As it says in the book of Mishlei, remember, this is not a biblical verse. This is a verse from Nach, that it says you should always walk in the path of the good. Okay? V'im onihu, and especially if the person is poor and he can't afford it, and if you're going to have to therefore take it out of his pay, and ve'en lo ma yochal, and he's not going to be able to eat anything if you take it out of his pay, mitzvah litein lo scharo, there's even a mitzvah to pay him for breaking your items. In other words, there's actually two issues here. Number one, I'm paying you to get a valuable commodity from point A to point B. You failed to do that because you broke it. So number one, I should forgive you for the value of the commodity that you broke. And number two, if I see that you're going to go home empty-handed, and you need to put food on the table, and if not, you and your family are not going to have what to eat, even though you didn't do what I hired you to do, I should still pay you for that day's work. Okay?
Rabbi, does it make a difference whether, we haven't asked this question for a while, but it sounds like it might be asked now, whether the employee is Jewish, the employer?
Well, we'll see. Let's take a look at the Imrei Yaakov. Okay. But let's see. Let's just finish the text. Shenemar,
sorry.
As it says, "Ve'orchos tzadikim tishmor." It says in Mishlei, in the very same book, you shall preserve the pathways of the righteous. So we have two different psukim. The first pasuk, which is from Mishlei chapter 2, says, Laman telech b'derech tovim, walk in the way of the good. And then he quotes a different pasuk, which is it's the very same verse, but a different phrase in the verse, Ba'orcho sadikim tishmor. V'zohi orach tzadikim lishmor derech Hashem. And this is the pathway of the righteous, to preserve the way of God. La'asos tzedakah u'mishpat lifnim mishuras adin. To do acts of charity and justice that go above the letter of the law. Now, why is this called the path of Hashem? I can only assume, before we've taken a look at the Imrei Yaakov, that after all, doesn't God reward us for good intentions? Doesn't God give us credit? Machshava tova HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Let's see, what does it say? That God conjoins good intentions with actions. That even if a person had the intent to do a mitzvah and wasn't able to do it, Hashem still gives him the reward for that mitzvah. So maybe that's the reason. Even though you didn't do the job for me, and so therefore, technically, I'm exempt from paying you. But if I want to follow in the ways of the Lord, Hashem would give me a reward if I wasn't able to do the mitzvah, but I had planned to do it. Let's say I wanted to do a chesed, and I wanted to visit my friend in the hospital. I get in the car doesn't start, and I've got to call the towing company, et cetera, and I can't end up not being able to go fulfill the mitzvah of Bikor Cholim. But Hashem still gives me the reward of Bikor Cholim because that was my intention. So maybe that's the reason why this is true as well. The Gemara is going to tell us a story about this. I think we learned the story already. I think we'll see in just a moment. But let's go through this halacha. So, unfortunately, we're out of time. So we'll do Amir Hashem, the Imrei Yaakov on this tomorrow, and have a great day.
So, Rabbi, before you go, I can quickly tell you that it says no employee can agree to waive or give up their rights under the Employment Standards Act. For example, the right to receive overtime pay or public holiday. Any such agreement is null and void.
Interesting.
So that's from the Ontario legislation.
Thank you for that, Paul. Have a great day.